Hello everybody, I'm Nick, and in this video I want to talk about a topic I'm pretty passionate about, which is the abstraction love we have in .NET, or abstraction fetish, depending on who you ask. And this thing where we just keep adding layers on top of layers on top of layers, just for the sake of abstracting something that presumably, according to this post over here, is already abstracted. And I want to read this Reddit post today and see what they have to say and whether I agree or disagree, and give you my opinion on it. So after more than 2 decades immersed in the .NET ecosystem, I find myself increasingly wary, not only of the technology itself, but of a recurring pattern, the relentless pursuit of over-abstraction. 100% true. You see things like mediator, mappers, you see clean architecture, vertical slice, like DDD. There's so many things and so many patterns and so much over-abstraction, which by all means, I'm not saying is not necessary, but I think if you look into other ecosystems, .NET has sort of a way to overdo it quite a bit. There should be patterns and there should be some standardization, but you join a team and you see one use of the patterns, and you join another team and you see a complete other use of the patterns, and it can be a bit hard to keep track of everything. At least that's how I felt moving through massive teams and massive companies and eventually leading some of them, to just pick and choose what makes sense for that specific project. And especially with new engineers coming in, it can be so overwhelming just having a massive project thrown at you and then having to see how the requests flow from one layer to another. And in some cases, they don't flow. For example, if you use mediator and you just try to step over the sender, you don't just step into that handler. You have to put a breakpoint into the handler and then you step into it, which can be very confusing for a new developer. Now, before I move on, I'd like to let you know that it's Dome Train's 2nd birthday, and we're celebrating with our biggest sale yet. Yes, bigger than Black Friday too. Until the 1st of May, you can use discount code BIRTHDAY2 at checkout for any of our 85 courses, any of our already discounted bundles, as well as Dome Train Pro and workshops where me and other authors teach you live a certain topic. We keep releasing courses. We have 5 courses released in the past month, including TypeScript, sending emails in .NET, as well as using AI and LLMs in your programming workflow to be more efficient and more productive. So you don't want to miss this sale. Link in the description. Now back to the video. Now, the landscape of .NET has undeniably transformed over the years, yet one frustrating issue persists: the urge to build layers upon layers of complexity where simplicity would suffice. The thing is, you have to be a good developer, a really good developer, to implement a system that makes sense, that is simple, that is coded in a simple way. I think all of these layers and all of these guidelines to the complexity actually give some structure and some guardrails to developers that are not really proficient in C# or architecture, because you have the architecture already made for you, and then you don't really have to make any decisions. You know you have your API handler, then you know you have your mappers, then you know you have mediator, then mediator injects services, then services inject EF core or a repository pattern, and then it flows down like this. So it's very easy to see how everything comes together. And I remember when I needed to add a new endpoint in a system with clean architecture and mediator and all that, all I did is take a look at the project and say, oh, this has a customers repository. So if I want to start storing product, I have to make a product repository. And what's in there? Database calls. So I'm going to make the database queries. And where is that used? Oh, in that service. So I'm going to create a service. And that sort of learning through patterns can actually be really, really helpful, especially for mid-level developers to senior developers. For juniors, it can be a bit confusing, but again, if you focus on just looking at the patterns, you can learn a lot. And I know this is sort of contradicting what I said before about junior developers, but it's a double-edged sword the way it can be a steep learning curve, but then at least you have this valley of simplicity, or not really simplicity, but this valley of standardization that you can then replicate. So I'm on the fence on this specific take, yet we often seem compelled to complicate things further, losing sight of the business logic that should be our driving focus. It's as if we're abstracting the already abstracted, creating a labyrinth of code where clarity and efficiency should reign. I agree with that, and all of these layers have an overhead as well, of course, in the performance sense, but they also have an overhead in you reading the code. Because remember, you're only going to write the code once, but every time you need to debug it, every time you need to see what it's doing, every time you need to add something to it, you're going to have to read it many, many times. So you write once, read many times, and I like to code my projects thinking of that as I do. This tendency towards over-abstraction is particularly prevalent within the .NET community. Completely agree with that. You don't really see it in so many other ecosystems. Maybe in the Java ecosystem you'll see it a bit, but JavaScript, Python, and all of these other languages that are more popular than .NET and C#, you won't really see. It's as if a default mode of operation is to construct intricate architectures rather than focusing on delivering value. I have seen developers like this in my time. I've seen developers that fixate more on the code itself rather than what the code is supposed to be doing. And they take pride of that. The truth is, as developers, we're building products. We don't build code. The code we build is a vehicle to deliver that product. And of course, you want to make the best vehicle, but don't focus so much on the vehicle and forget that you have to deliver a really good product. 40% of the web runs on WordPress still. So even though it's very important, focus on the product more than on the code itself. Take, for instance, a common enterprise scenario, straightforward CRUD application buried under 6 layers of abstraction. Repositories, unit of work. I don't really see unit of work that much. I think repositories have a value because you do encapsulate that database logic in there, which I think should be encapsulated. Makes testing easier as well. However, if you're using EF Core, you don't need repositories, do not use them. Services, I think services wrapping that business logic makes a lot of sense as well. So I have no problem with that. Same with DDOs, you should be decoupling your database contracts and your API contracts from your domain object. So I don't agree with unit of work, but I agree with repository, service, and DDOs. I think you should have them in my opinion, but that's as far as you should go. I don't think you need mediators, just a waste of time and a layer that gives you the fake feeling of abstracting something or decoupling something, even though you've done nothing, but just used a very smart way to push an in-memory message from one place to another. Same with CQRS. I don't think it's as big of a deal as people make it be. If you're very strong on event sourcing, then I get it, but on its own, it's more of a gimmick than actually something that adds value. All before a single line of business logic emerges. Yeah, but all of this usually comes in a template. So at least in the companies I've worked for, we've made templates that give you the structure out of the box. So the next thing you do is you add business logic. So I'm, again, not 100% agreeing with this. That's where I stand given my experience. All the instances of microservice per project were 3 users in a single database. Yeah, 100%. You definitely don't need microservices for something like that, or even a complicated hosting environment. I think as long as you can achieve 0 downtime, you don't need to overcomplicate this. These choices are inherently wrong, but when applied dogmatically, they transform simplicity into spaghetti. It depends, as with always. I've seen this turn into spaghetti. I've seen people make mistakes and put code into the wrong layer, and then someone gets very, very angry about it, and they have to have a talk. I've seen the lack of this as well lead to very bad code, so I'm not quite sure I agree with this 100%. This begs a question. Should developers be burdened with making high-level cloud and software architecture decisions on every project? I think cloud architecture and software architecture are very different. Cloud architecture have to make sense with how everything comes together. On the service layer, you have your API, your background worker, your Azure function, your message queue, all that. This is completely different than software architecture and how everything hangs in your solution, which I think what this is referring to. So 2 completely different skills, sometimes done by different people as well. We're asking them to be both builders and architects. Again, it depends on the job. Perhaps it's time to advocate for a clear division of responsibilities where developers are empowered to concentrate on crafting clean, secure, and efficient code that directly addresses business needs. Now, here's the thing. A few years ago, I made a REST API course, which is now on Dome Train, which, by the way, we have a few workshops that I'm doing live with other people. So check them out, link below, and code workshop 20 at checkout for 20% off. But the thing that this course gets the most compliments for is I actually used no standard architecture. So no clean architecture, no DDD, no event sourcing, no nothing. It is just the most skeleton-based, like raw project that can be adapted to anything. And I intentionally made that decision because if you write code like this, you can just use it wherever you want. And it makes sense for a product that is supposed to be used by many people. And what I've come to the conclusion after this course is that that's how I like building stuff. Because even for me, the flexibility of having a clean slate and then doing the most basic thing in a good structure, but still basic and simple, works really, really well for me in order to understand the project, to explain the project, and to debug the project. And you learn those things by teaching. So meanwhile, dedicated architects and specialists should be responsible for shaping the broader structure. And I don't know about that. I think developers can really upskill themselves if they are well-versed in these principles. So I do think you should be striving to learn how to architect things and shape the structure and the infrastructure. Because coding is one aspect of your job, but infrastructure, architecture, cloud architecture, like all of these things will really make you be better, more valuable, and you'll be able to effectively ask for more money and get a better position if you know how to do them. So don't settle on just being good at code, because someone that's also good at code but can also do this thing will basically just get more money from you, or just a job. The fallout from this complexity is tangible. Debugging becomes a treasure hunt. This isn't a call to abandon abstraction entirely. It's a plea for intentionality, which I like the way this is expressed. Start simple, ask what's the minimum viable architecture, exactly what I did with that REST API course, before defaulting to enterprise-grade scaffolding. Embracing Yagni, you aren't gonna need it, and KISS, keep it simple, stupid principles. Let business requirements, not hypothetical future features, drive design. 100% agree, and I've seen this being done wrong so many times, usually by developers that take great pride in building good code. And I get it, I was one of those, but the truth is, you're over-engineering for your own personal reasons and not for what the company needs. I know we can get very personally attached to the code, but we shouldn't. And it's one of the hardest things you need to just leave behind you and move forward in your life and in your career. Some of .NET's most elegant solutions thrive on simplicity. Consider minimal APIs in .NET ASP.NET Core, the Spark, purposeful departure from boilerplate MVC. 100% agree with this statement. I love minimal APIs and the flexibility they give you, and I think they should have been there from the very beginning, and MVC should be an afterthought. And if that had happened, people wouldn't like MVC that much. Or the rise of virtual slices, which prioritizes feature cohesion over horizontal layering. 100% agree. And if I wasn't to use my simple architecture I'm using, vertical slices is my favorite way to architect projects. Again, another thing we have a cost and DOM train. This shift reminds us that abstractions is a means, not the end. Great quote. Amazing post, honestly. Other than a few things I didn't agree with, I think this is expressed very, very well. The .NET ecosystem is incredible. Let's honor it by building systems that are straightforward as they are robust. After all, the best code isn't the cleverest, it's the one that solves the problem with the least friction. Wow, this person woke up today and chose to speak truth. This is an amazing post. I agree with the vast majority of what has been expressed here, and I'm just very quickly going to look at the comments. You can't write simple if you're not an expert. Most developers can't write a simple system from scratch, so they default to copy-pasting others' code. Yeah, and it's part of what we do, really. Like, it goes back to what I said before. Sometimes you see what's already there, and then you get inspired or just copy, and you implement a new thing. And that's where this sort of abstraction works. Basically, I look at over abstraction as inlining code that wasn't made into a library from other projects, code that could have initially needed for abstraction. If you had the time and expertise, you could, guys, use commas, you could remove the unnecessary abstraction, but then again, skill issues and deadlines. And most importantly, it works. Yeah, it works is ultimately all that the business cares about. Like, does the product work? I don't care how it's built. Nobody is looking into your code from the business perspective to see how you implemented it. All they need to know is you can sell the product, you can onboard the client, you can present something that just works, really. So, amazing post. Very much agreeing with the vast majority of this, but I really want to know from you, what do you think about this? And are we actually abstracting the over-abstracted or the already abstracted? Leave a comment down below and let me know. Well, that's all I had for you for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, keep coding.